Welcome, everyone, to Crossroads Consulting, XR Insights. Crossroads Consulting is where we help companies outsource, grow, and protect their assets. Today, we have a special guest with us. Actually, before that, this is Jeff and Billy Rhodes. Our special guest this morning is Larry Pino with the Pino Law Group. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. Honored to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Larry. I've been following you and communicating with you over the last several months. And man, I really find your background intriguing and the things that you're doing very pertinent to what Crossroads Consulting does. We look at startup companies all the way through their life cycle to exit and all points in between. We're trying to be of value and bringing experts such as yourself to the table, where business owners can get some great information sitting at their desk or in their car. But to get started, Larry, your background is quite substantial. Please give us as much of your background as you would like. This is your time, and yeah, I'd love to hear more about your background.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I tell you what, I'll try to keep it as short as possible, not to bore you. Okay, because I've obviously lived a long time. So started off, graduated from Notre Dame, so University of Notre Dame, and after Notre Dame, I went to New York University Law School and got my law degree there. Ended up with 3 different certificates in Spain, in Madrid, Rome, and Paris, in foreign languages. Came back here to Florida. Got a doctorate in business administration. So I've got the bachelor's, the law degree, the doctorate in business administration. And once I was back in Florida, which is where I'm from, in Winter Park, Florida, I ended up starting the 3 things that have continued to be pretty much my entire career. I immediately, because I had no interest in doing anything other than business and investments. I was all about business and investments and entrepreneurship. That's what I always wanted to do. So I just immediately started in those categories. So opened up a law practice. I mean, literally from scratch. I got a downtown building in Orlando and decided that I was going to put it under contract, optioned it with a right to remodel, and set up my law practice and started telling people I are a lawyer. And, so I do talks in the following areas, so I started to build up my law practice, loved business. So Dad and I got into the sporting goods business as our very first startup. And I put the original option on 24 South Orange. But then after that, got involved in a lot of commercial real estate. So pretty much what I just described to you has really been the core of what I have done my entire life, with one additional component is I did after that get very much involved in trading in the capital markets, so stocks and options, which I am continuing to be a very active trader in. So with that, I've always had a small boutique commercial investment securities law firm, and I'll get back to that more because that's really the core of our conversation. I've ended up doing some 80 startups over my career. I've sold right about 1.75 billion in products and services, and with that, some large, some small. The business that I did, what I'm doing right now is in senior living, in assisted living and memory care and so forth. Prior to that, it was a technology company, primarily for the capital markets, which was really the largest I ever ran. That was about $250 million a year in sales. We had about 600 employees in 2 primary areas in Orlando and in Dallas. And that did very, very well. I mean, really well, from 0 to 250 million a year in sales, 40 million in annual profit. So it did very, very well. And then this pesky thing came along called the Great Recession. And in a matter of literally 6 months, I went from making 4 million a month in income to losing 700,000 a month. which was obviously not sustainable, right?
Wow.
So I ended up having, especially because nobody knew how long the recession was going to last. So I ended up having to sell off the parts. So I sold off the parts, shut down the company. But that was really the law. And then eventually 2 years later, started senior living. But, just across the board, I've always been involved in the law practice. I've always been involved in business. And then the final thing is have always been involved in real estate investing and stocks and options, but heavy real estate investing. So very much commercial real estate. Have always gravitated towards commercial. I did do residential, single family, stuff like that, but that was not as much. I didn't have a whole lot. After I had bought something like 18 residential real estate units, I then said, okay, I now have 18 residential real estate units.
Yeah.
At which point I sold them all off and took back notes. And I liked the notes a lot more than I liked the residential real estate. So, but I've done that. And then pretty much altogether, I think I've done in real estate and asset transactions, some in excess of 2.5–3 billion of total assets. I mean, the senior living alone, just those 3 units was 140 million just on those. So in any event, that's my pride. That's my background.
Sure.
Yeah, so all the pieces and parts fit nicely into the law practice, the business law practice. What's interesting is you've had so much experience as an entrepreneur. You've done the startups, you've grown companies, but you're also on the legal side of it. So it really is kind of a match made in heaven, the way your career is shaped up.
And that really is, by the way, pretty much my sweet spot. I mean, the clients, my clients basically consist of business people, entrepreneurs, investors, people who are doing things in creating wealth. That's what they're about, is creating wealth. So whether they're producing income, they aspire to produce income, they have assets, they aspire to produce assets. Regardless of what it is, there's some component of wealth building. So when they're dealing with me, I mean, I sort of say I never lose a client, because once they're here, they realize that I'm not just their lawyer. I've done it. I mean,
Yeah,
right.
I've had 2,500 employees, that over the years. So I had a client, for example, just this weekend. I happened to come in for a few hours on Saturday, and sends me, and he's a syndicator. He's a major $100 million syndicator. He wanted to hire an executive assistant. So he sends me a contract for a recruiter. And I say, okay, but let me suggest to you, recruiters are fine, but let me suggest to you, this is your executive assistant. This is very personal. Let me suggest to you, do it yourself. And then I told him a number of stories on my side. My executive assistant just retired December 31st. She was with me for 42 years.
Wow.
oh my.
And she just retired. The assistant that I have, who is just simply stepping in until we hire another one, has been with me for 27 years. We don't get those types of people through recruiters. We get those types of people by putting them through a process and vetting them. So I told them what that process was. So when I'm responding to a client, I'm not responding on the basis of just, listen, here's the recruiter's contract. I can give you I can evaluate the recruiter's contract if you really want me to, but let me give you real world experience instead.
Right.
And the first thing I got this morning in the email response was, I got it, Larry, understood. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it your way. And so it's kind of like, and you know what? So I say, absolutely. And tap us. So I had somebody here send him the ad we used and posted on LinkedIn and Indeed and Facebook for, what we're doing in replacing that, Kathy, who's been with me for all those years. And guess what? She starts tomorrow. So, after 2.5 months, basically. So of searching for the right person to make that happen. So that's kind of what I bring to the table for my clients, is the law, of course, but also the real world experience and actually having done it successfully in the business world and the investment world.
Yeah. You know, being in the Winter Park area, the Orlando area, it's ripe for startup technology, ripe for life science companies with Lake Nano, and that whole area is just exploding, and it's changing the Florida economy more from the citrus world to startup technology. Life science is thriving. So if we talk about startups, people have ideas on the whiteboard and they want to start a company. What are some of the steps? I mean, obviously, you and I communicated on what state do you register your organization, and I found some of that pretty interesting. But the whole concept of starting a company, and from what we've talked to others like investment bankers, they always emphasize starting it the right way, especially from a legal perspective and a financial perspective. What are your thoughts on how actually to start a company, get it off the whiteboard?
You know, I think to a large extent, when I am approached, it's usually an approach that talks about, hey, do I use an LLC? Do I use a corporation? What state do I form the company in, and all that? And I really do shift the conversation pretty quickly. And I shifted to the far more substantive components of, tell you what, let's put that on the back burner. That's easy. That's like, we're not even going to break a sweat on that one. That's easy to handle. Here's the real issue. What do you want to do? What do you really want to do? What are you really trying to accomplish? I'm working, and by the way, we have we're a very small boutique law firm. We only have 7 people, seven lawyers. And one of those is our specialist in startups. So, for example, he's involved in all of the organizations that you happen to mention in Central Florida, very much involved in life sciences, very much involved in tech, very much involved in the incubators, and so forth and so on. So he very familiar with the capital raising component, with the safes and all that kind of thing. But when I'm doing it, when I'm approaching it, and before I'm even turning it over to Andre, what I'm doing is doing exactly what we did, Jeff, when you originally contacted me because of finding your niche. And what it really represented, at the sort of the core of finding your niche is, what do you really want to accomplish? What are you trying to create here? And that involves a couple things. That involves, first of all, introspection. What is it that's the perfect match between who you are and what you want to do in business? How do you extend yourself in business in a way where you can really manifest? And I call that process, that's the first 3 chapters of finding your niche, which is called integrational processing. It's integrational because you're starting from yourself, you're extending out to a business, and then from there, you then extrapolate a particular market that you're going to be going after, so that you have a product market connection that allows you an opportunity to not only identify what it is you want to do in business, but also identify the particular market that you want to be targeting. And that process, this integrational processing process, is, from my standpoint, part of the beginning of what you do with a startup. Every single one I did, and of all these 80 startups, always started in that particular way. Something that was gratifying to me, that also could have a business application attached to it, and could then identify a market that it could go after. And if you don't have that linear clarification, you end up bouncing around. And the one thing you don't want to be doing in a bit, there's some bouncing. It's not bouncing. There is some vetting. Anytime you have a startup, you're going to be vetting, because you're going to try a number of different things. But what you're doing is you're starting those things within the context of the business that you're going after, the market that you want to be able to approach. And even if I think about it in terms of what I've done in law, I loved teaching. I was going to be a professor and decided to become a lawyer instead. And so I loved teaching. So when I first began looking around doing business, I did sporting goods. But the truth of the matter is, we ended up building 9 sporting goods stores. We franchised them, we sold them. We had an athletic business, and we became the largest athletic ball distributor in the state of Florida on an institutional level. The counties and the rec departments and the school boards and all that would bid, we'd ship it out of the warehouse. But the truth of the matter is, I never really enjoyed sporting goods. And we sold the business. We did very, very well when we sold the business. I just didn't really enjoy it. So when I had the opportunity to really look for something that I really enjoyed, it was being able to train adults, being able to find a way to train adults and professionals in something that they wanted to do. And that, by the way, when you saw Finding Your Niche, that was the very first book that I ever wrote on that particular subject. And I was writing it to people just like you who had a professional background, a background in an employment environment, but wanted to be able to do it in self-employment. And so I was creating a transitional method for you to be able to identify what that was going to look like. And for me, it was doing institutes.
Yeah, that was interesting. Your book, Finding Your Niche, really did hit home with me. There was some tasks that you wanted us to do, and it wasn't easy because you were doing a lot of self-reflection, and you had to be as honest as you could. And I want to be brutally honest. And I was, and some of it was a little bit painful, but it was eye-opening. It was helpful. Let me ask you this. Is it harder to start a business today? And if so, or if not, why?
Oh gosh, no. I think that the explosion of business startups that you're seeing now, and so many incredibly talented, young people who are now out there doing stuff, is precisely because it's far easier to start a business today than ever. Let me give you just an illustration. I mentioned the last company that I was involved in, that I started, which was a company that started off doing training programs, miscellaneous institutes, and we did training programs for adults. Started off with one, and years later, we were actually literally doing 32 trainings a week, 32 trainings a week around the country. We did 232 actual events on a weekly basis, right? In different types of trainings. However, one of them was for a tech product we had created, which was called Wise Trade. And that was Wise Trade for the different capital markets, Wise Trade for stocks, Wise Trade for options, Wise Trade for commodities, so forth and so on. And one of them was an automated trading platform. The automated trading platform was one which was called Command Trade. And it was a trading platform that allowed you to identify how to trade. And we had 2 Command Trade products. One was for Forex, and one was for the capital market stocks. And in each of those cases, it was automated trading. You back test, you forward test, and then you pull the trigger and say, okay, now do it yourself. And it would actually do it itself. I can't even tell you the infrastructure that we needed to support that process. I mean, we're talking about in the millions. I went back to buy back that company after, because I had to sell them all off at recession time. I went back to buy it back, and I realized that I could have done a startup for 1/10 of the cost that it would cost me to even buy back the company, because technology had become so advanced. So I now have, by the way, with an investment of less than $50,000, I now have an automated trading program that I use myself in my own trading. I'm not out there selling it. I'm just using it myself. But it cost me less than $50,000 to put together, not $1 million or $2 million or $3 million. And the reason I say that to you is, if you take a look at all of the massive amounts of different opportunities that have exploded because of the internet, and because of the technologies that are available on apps, that I didn't have in those days. It wasn't even around. So yes, I think it's much easier today, but the only thing it does do, I mean, I did get involved in an AI company I funded a startup. And the problem that they had is exactly what I try to argue against in finding your niche. And that is focus. You need to be able to focus. And you might want to be testing different things and test A against B and B against C to identify what results you get, but you have to be able to focus. AI was a year ago when this occurred, was explosive. And you could choose your niche, whatever one, because it was all available to you. But you better do it quickly. And number two, you better be focused, because if you're not going to be a sharpshooting specialist in a particular area, I will guarantee you'll get run over by everybody behind you. So very easy to start businesses today, more so than ever. However, I think that the principle of finding your focal point becomes even more important precisely because of that.
So Larry, talking about structures of a startup, a lot of people, including myself, I've had another company where I had a partner. One of them went well, and another one with a partner did not go so well as planned. How do you feel about being an individual owner versus partnerships and things that people should think about when they're looking to start something up like that?
Yeah, and my experience on my personal experience is most everything that I have done, I have basically either been the 100% owner or clearly the primary driver. And I might have somebody who's got a 10% interest or something of that nature, but is by no means what I would consider to be a partner.
Right.
A partner in arms in terms of being very committed. But at the end of the day, this is not a partner. So that's really my experience. So I now default to, okay, so now what about all of my clients? And I think across the board, my experience through my clients is that most of the time, the relationships work well when there is for want of a better term, I'm going to call it a single alpha, a primary founder who's clearly not only the founder, but who's also in charge, and a good second person to be a support mechanism. That second person can be a language of corporate, a COO, could be a CFO, it could be a chief marketing officer, somebody that's really needed based upon who this one person is not. And I think that tends to work better than equal partnerships. I think where the equal partnerships get sticky is when with an equal partnership, it's tough unless there's massive amount of self-respect, massive amount of cross respect for the individuals. And that tends to work mostly for a while, not always. But at that point in time, it does tend to become somewhat difficult, especially if they reach issues. So if I were approaching it from the standpoint of what is the ideal, I'd have to say, really, from my experience, the ideal is somebody who is a strong founder, who has a good second and third person supporting that founder. With that said, by the way, I think that the enormous issue behind the founder really being the alpha is that the founder has to recognize the level of humility that the founder has to have in respecting and assimilating the feedback that he or she is getting from the primary leadership team. Because if they don't respect it and they don't assimilate it, they do have the capacity to be too sheltered from the feedback to be able to be effective as the primary decision maker. So when I was CEO of the last company, which had a much bigger leadership team, I mean, it was a total of 600. I had 8 operating divisions. So, each one had its own head, and then I had the corporate. So you had general counsel, you had CFO, and so forth. So I had probably about 15 people who had the leadership team responding to me. And then they would take care of their teams, their operational teams. And I used to make the comment to them, do yourself a favor, talk less, listen more. Talk less, listen more. Because you're the decision maker. So you have the right to make the decision. Therefore, you need to be able to hear all of the advice that's going to be coming to you and not truncate it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've seen that in the large corporations, publicly traded corporations that I've worked for. The listening side doesn't exist oftentimes.
Right.
It's completely the opposite. Hey, you mentioned earlier that capital raise. We're kind of living in a rich environment with venture capital, private equity. There's a lot of money out there. A lot of startups, especially technology, life science. They are kind of relying on venture capital investor money after the friends and family has been fully extinguished. How do you feel about, or when should a company start approaching a venture capital firm, and how should they do that?
I think that they've got to have, at very bare minimum, they have to have proof of concept. Do they have to have proof of concept? No. But when should they? The question is, subjunctively, when should they? If they have proof of concept. So first of all, what are you trying to accomplish? You're trying to basically understand whether we even have a product or a market at all. I'm working with a relatively well-heeled set of medical professionals right now who are at a point where they have they have their clear understanding about the size of the market they want to go after, the product they want to distribute to that particular market. They've even gone as far as their product was on order so that they can test it. And it's not FDA type stuff, so it's nutraceutical type stuff. So they have the ability to be able to test it without having to worry about, the FDA regulations and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where they are right now. And I've had several meetings with them once every other week and all that. And they keep asking me the question. So when is this ripe to go find capital? I said, yeah. It's real simple. Is your product ready? If your product is ready, what's your proof? It's not what your proof of concept is. I'm okay with your proof of concept. It's a big market out there as long as you have a product that works. So it's proof of product. So what do you need to do? You finally got delivery of the product. Test it. Test it. You don't need to have 1,000 people to test. Test it on 100. Test it on 150. Test it on 200. At least allow yourself to get real data. And then once you have data, if you have proof of product, then you now have a story to tell for purposes of bringing in capital. Prior to that time, it's not that it can't be done, but it's a women of prayer. And it just becomes a lot tougher to be able to sell the ether if you don't actually have the additional element of some type of proof of product that you can offer. Now, prior to that time, there are people who are susceptible to the women of prayer, and that's friends and family.
Yeah.
And it's colleagues that believe in you because they trust in you and they trust and they know who you are and so forth. So it's not like capital is precluded. But if you're actually talking about actual VC money, that's the best time to approach the VC money.
So they also, in my experiences, they invest in leadership. So I think to your point earlier about whether you go single pony or you have supporting people around you, sometimes the supporting people around you, they have credentials that are valuable from a VC or investor. Look, this guy, somebody like Larry Pino, who's been down this road many times, that's going to carry weight, because oftentimes from what I've heard is VCs will invest in leaders more than they will the other side of it.
Totally agree. I totally agree. The leadership is really important, and the history of leadership is really important. I mean, to the point that it's 50-50, and to not only the product and the opportunity, but the leadership team or the leadership, and that could be just one person whose brain is coming to the table. In this case, for example, that I was just using as an example, that is precisely the person they're bringing in as the person who will be running the company as president. So the founder is going to come, is basically board, is founding board, has history. But in terms of the person who's actually going to be driving the product, they're bringing somebody in who has a history of bringing a product to market successfully, along with an exit of the company, which obviously provides substantial solace for a VC investor who's going to be putting up the money for it. You bet.
So when would you start looking at a board of directors? How does that play into the equation?
Well, I mean, I suppose it depends on what you're thinking about in terms of the board of directors. So if you're looking at a board of directors with the intention of raising capital, that's one thing. If you're looking at, and it depends on where in the capital raising you are, what level you're at. Number two, though, if you're looking at the board of directors as primarily individuals who are capable of providing feedback to you along the way to get there, then that's as soon as you think that you can use it. Because now it's not a question of cosmetic. It's not a question of providing a portrait for future capital raising. It's, hey, I really need help in putting this together. I am terrible at marketing. And so I would love for you, Larry, I don't care if it's a board of directors or a board of advisors, but I would love for you to be able to assist me just so that I can better understand what is the appropriate way to really create a marketing presence for this particular company. So in other words, those types of, it's a small D for director. It's a board of advisors. It's somebody who can assist you. Sometimes those people turn out to be board members at a really formal level. Sometimes they don't.
When you look at mistakes that startups make, is the amount of money that they want to raise or expect to raise, that seems to be kind of a wild card. I've heard from others that oftentimes founders don't ask for enough money, or the money that they're asking to raise isn't really going to do the job. So they've got to kind of determine how much money is going to be needed and how many more rounds of funding do we need. Thoughts on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I think it works on both sides. Sometimes they're looking for too little, but sometimes they look for too much. And most of the time it has to do with, what's the bite of the apple that we're looking for? So I'm working with now a different company, as an example now, working with a different company who is involved. And they're doing a major capital raise, because the idea for this particular founder is that the market is this. Therefore, that founder wants to capture this much capital to be able to market. And my response to that has been, okay, but can we not chunk it down a little bit? Can we not just simply identify that your first format is to go after this market, and this is a subset of that market, but it's a subset and it requires less capital. Why not target this market as a subset? Identify the capital you need for this, and then let's go after this amount of capital, not this amount of capital. So sometimes it works to where it's too much capital that they're going after, which hinders their efforts. And sometimes it is too small. So what's the level there? What's the gradient? The gradient is the size of the market you're going after. And so, or the share of the market that you're going after. I mean, if you take, you take a look at, as an example, the classic startup Netflix, they captured a particular share of the market. And when they captured that share, then it opened up the whole new regime, right? They knocked off blockbusters, obviously, and blockbusters had the market, but they were going after a much smaller market, and they were satisfied. They did a satisfactory job at marketing that, and then they went after the larger market. They never would have had the capital to have gone after the larger market in the very beginning. So the better issue is always to clarify what you're trying to accomplish, identify the business vehicle, and I don't mean type of company, the business model that's going to get you there, and then identify the market you're going to go after. The capital for that market is the capital that you would want to raise. Whatever it is, it is. And if you need, 3 million for that market, that's 3 million. If you need 30 million for that market, then let's go after the 30 million. But at least you have a cogent needs case as to the relationship between the market you want to go after and the capital you need to do that.
The other big item that often comes up too when you're talking to venture capitalists is the equity side of it. They like to take a big chunk of equity, and the founders are kind of reluctant to give away 30, 40, 50% or more in equity. How does that balance out?
Well, I mean, it's both of those. I mean, certainly the VC part, VC sources are certainly looking for a share that allows them an opportunity to make good profits, because they realize that many of those are their efforts are going to be strikeouts. So they understand that they're going to want it. Same time, they also want to make sure that the founding team is more than adequately incentivized to be able to work real hard to make this thing occur. In addition to which, they also understand that after another year or 2 years of operation, the value of the remaining interest in the company is also going to be significantly higher. And so, or that's the premise, that it's going to be significantly higher. So that when they're going for the tranches, if you will, each one of the stages of funding, they're doing it for a number of reasons. Number one, here's how much money you need to be able to get to this next milestone. For that, we want X amount. Now, at that point in time, we now have an opportunity to revalue the company. And then we can put the money in for that, and they're always going to maintain their options to be the first primary investor for that round. And then this is how much we're going to want for that. And so you can stage it, and it's at that point that the VC partner very likely will bring in another VC partner to assist and to be able to also grow the thing with them, because it creates greater synergy when you have more than the one VC partner who's actually out there fundamentally pitching the company.
Yeah, and in determining the equity share, there's got to be a pre-money valuation. Do you rely on the VC to do that pre-money valuation, or do you spend some money and get a third party to do it?
It's a dialogue. The problem with the dialogue, well, it is a dialogue no matter what. The problem with the third party valuation, you can get third parties, but it depends on how far along you are, because oftentimes in the pre-market valuations, it is so hit or miss because you don't have enough touch points. Now, the farther along the company is in terms of what I called proof of product, proof of concept, data, the greater the data, then the greater you have the ability to be able to isolate a valuation for it. That's what, I suppose that's what the magic is in VC, that tends to be less magic and just simply more math when it comes to PE firms. Is that with VC, it is you're dealing with a haze out there as to what could potentially happen. So help yourself. And the way that you help yourself is by getting yourself as far along as you possibly can in actual data supporting your value proposition.
So, as a business lawyer, let me see if I can ask this the way I want to. We've talked a lot about starting up a company, positioning the company to raise money, but as a business lawyer, how would you structure the organization? Does it matter if it's an LLC, a C corp? Obviously, things can change as the company evolves. What do you see as the first steps in setting up your company from a legal perspective?
It really depends on what the team is. So if you're talking about, somebody who comes in who has a startup idea, it's the simplest form. You just form an LLC. I wouldn't even call it necessarily at that point. It can always transfer to a corporation, but it's just a simple form that allows you the greatest latitude to be able to just operate the company. And at that point in time, I'm ambivalent as to whether I'm going to use a corporation or I'm going to use a limited liability company. I would do one or the other because I would prefer to have an entity as opposed to just simply being in that person's name. So except for that, it doesn't really matter to me. If we're dealing with several individuals where there are 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, I'm probably going to use an LLC. And I would use an LLC that has an operating agreement attached to it that very clearly identifies sort of the rights and the responsibilities and sort of the deliverables and making sure that we're clear with respect to who does what in the company and what their primary area of responsibility is. I would also I would also keep it very, very loose because time goes on. And as you know, in a startup, while my job is to do the following, everybody is pitching in at every level. So it's kind of like whatever needs to get done, everybody gets done. And so I would keep it as loose as I possibly can at that point. As time goes on, then you begin the process of beginning formalization. And as you formalize it more and more, it's because of the fact that the company needs that formalization as time goes on.
Yeah, so if things start to fall apart in the company, that's probably when the legal intensity gets at its greatest. How do you separate, or do you set that up in the very beginning?
You set it up in the very beginning. I mean, you don't come in to, I remember just one classic example. It happened just 2 or 3 years ago. The partners came in to get an operating agreement. They'd never had one. And they came in to get an operating agreement at the point that they were fighting. Well, that's probably not the time to get an operating agreement, right?
You think?
Yeah. And so, they disappear. So finally, after we're trying to do it, they just disappeared. And then he showed up literally 2 months ago. He has a company on his own and so forth. And he says, I really feel bad that I never came back and told you what happened. He says, we were never able to get to work it out. So we just simply decided to part company and, some money was exchanged and they went their separate ways. It's kind of like, okay, but that's understandable.
Yeah.
Time to start is obviously, and again, in the very beginning, it can be a loose structure. I mean, it can be a very loose structure. It doesn't have to be really tightly structured or formalized, but you do want to have a structure in place so that we do understand what's going to happen if you guys want to part company.
Yeah. So as the company grows, they get revenues and they're starting to gain traction. How does the legal perspective change at that point?
Well, again, it's fundamentally dependent upon the needs of the company at that juncture. If they're starting to do really, really well, they have a lot of legal needs, not just organizational needs. They have a lot of legal needs. I do, for example, just routinely, annually, I do strat plan with my clients. And I do it once a year as a gift which is a 1 hour strategic consulting. I give them a worksheet to fill out. They fill it out. They send it to me. We do a 1 hour Zoom call together. And then I send them a very detailed strat plan recap for my clients. I do that on my dime. I don't charge them for that. And the purpose of that is to really keep them moving forward on a linear basis in their company. And sometimes I'll basically say, I'll do a strat plan recap 1 year, and then the next year I find out that they think they're doing it, but they're so far off mark in terms of what they're doing that you have to recalibrate the entire thing for them. So I do that on an annual basis, and as time goes on, their needs become more significant. So then you come back and they're a startup, or they're not a startup, they're a smaller company, but they've produced some traction. And so you start asking them, so you haven't come back to me, do you have employment agreements? No. Okay, well, I think it's time to get employment agreements, don't you think? Do you have performance agreements? Well, what's a performance agreement? Well, an employment agreement is legal. A performance agreement identifies that there's clarity in terms of what your expectations are for them, what your expectation is in terms of their deliverables, how you measure those deliverables in terms of either metrics or KPIs, how you're going to be assessing that individual. That's all part of the performance agreement and the performance evaluation, which go hand in hand. Probably time for that. Do you have a policy, an employment policy manual?
All right.
Yes or no? So those types of things are the things that, as a company grows, you just simply integrate as time goes on, and on and on. Some that don't have, for example, supplier contracts, and those types of third-party agreements, and so forth.
Yeah, see, that's where I was thinking about heading is some of the intricacies of running a company, starting a company, running a company, the legal aspects, and some of the mistakes that are being made. They didn't do this from a legal perspective. The performance thing is intriguing to me because you're relying on partners to perform, and if they're spending too much time on a golf course or if we're out fishing, that can pose a lot of internal friction, I'm thinking.
Jeff, I think it's even more basic than that. I've been doing performance agreements now, and it's very detailed performance agreement, and it's all about the empowerment model. I can't empower you to do something if you don't know what you're being empowered to do. And I learned that literally 30 years ago, 35 years ago. I learned that I was relying on somebody to do a particular thing. And in actually running, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you the actual example was my Factoring Institute was the training organization. It gave me the opportunity to obtain factoring deals so that I could actually factor individuals' receivables. So I hired somebody to actually do, but she was a paralegal in my office, my legal office. So I wanted her to do the factoring deals themselves. I was never clear with her that I wanted her to source the deals, not just simply do the paperwork for the deal.
Oh.
So 3 to 6 months later, she had papered the deals that we did, but the only deals that she ever papered were the ones that I brought to her.
Right.
So it was kind of like, so I'm having conversation with her. I said, well, you know what? What I really need, this is fine, and you're doing a great job. You're a paralegal. You do a great job on factoring, on papering these transactions. But I'm looking for greater volume. I mean, we're teaching a lot of people how to become factoring brokers. We're not getting a whole lot of the deals. And she says, you were looking for me to source those deals? And I looked at her like, well, shame on me that you've sat here for whatever it was, 6 months, without realizing that I was looking for you to source the deals. So I created the performance agreement concept as a result of maybe that plus a couple other experiences of that nature, where I wanted to make sure that every single person in the organization, and I mean whether it's 10 or it's 600, everybody in any organization from that point on that I've had, any business that I've had, they all come in where there is an orientation program, anywhere from a day to 3 to 5 days, based on the company. And during that orientation program, they get acculturated to the company, acculturated to what we stand for, the mission, the vision, the intentionality of it, and all of those things, including performance agreements. Then that performance agreement becomes a live document, so that it is, here are the expressions for the, here are the expectations from the cultural standpoint. Here are the job description. Here's what you're going to be doing. Here are the deliverables, and so forth and so on. And it's all part of that. So it's not about making sure they're not fishing or on the golf course. It's really about making sure that they know where their win lies. Because you see this performance agreement that we just created ourselves together. This is your win. When there is a performance evaluation 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, or a year from now, this evaluation is going to evaluate exactly how you're doing against this performance agreement, because this is everything.
Yeah. You know, I might be off mark here, but all of the things that we've talked about today, that performance agreement, that could either sink a ship or take them to the moon.
Yeah, exactly. You get, and one of the concepts that you know I'm big on the integrational stuff. One of the biggest is integrational alignment, because when you have a company, you could have a company with 30 people, or 60 people, 100 or 600, and if they are all aligned, it's a beautiful thing.
Right.
It is a beautiful thing, because it's a well humming machine, because everybody is singing off the same song sheet.
Man, that's that's fascinating. You know, looking at your law firm, we should probably just touch briefly on some of the other areas. Obviously, we've talked about business and to some degree investment law, but you're also involved in securities investments, asset and estate planning, financial practice. Talk a little bit about your law firm. Go ahead and promote your law firm as much as you want, because that's what we're here for. But you do have a breadth of services that I don't see in a lot of law firms, to be honest.
Yeah, everything is really about, when you think about the type of client that we have. I started to represent people who were involved in business, and over time that just simply grew. So once you're involved in business, all of these contract things, which to us aren't, you don't even break a sweat over the contract stuff. It's just regular routine things that you do when you're in business. And then over time, obviously, there comes a time in which you want to buy a business, or there comes a time in which you want to sell a business. So we do all of that. We do hundreds of millions of dollars worth of what's known as M&A, mergers and acquisition.
Yeah.
It's really the sale and the purchase of businesses or professional practices, whether it's a dental practice or it's a medical practice, an accounting practice, a registered investment advisor practice, those types of things. I represented developers who were developing real estate. Well, there was only a certain point, those developers wanted to raise money, in order to get the money to be able to develop. So I started doing securities. So today we do hundreds of millions of dollars worth of securities a year in the 506B space, the 506C space, the Reg A, the Reg A plus. So I do securities. Well, when you're doing securities, you also have to do compliance.
Yeah.
Compliance consists of investor suitability or blue sky, or 144 letters. So you have compliance component attached to that. When you're representing those kinds of people, at a certain point, they say, "Hey, Larry, do you know anything about trusts and estates?" Well, I don't view myself as a trust and estate lawyer. However, I've done hundreds and hundreds, probably over 1,000 of the integrated structure over the years because I represent people who care about protecting their money. And so they want to make sure there's an appropriate estate plan, and they want to make sure there's an appropriate asset protection program in place for their money. And they want to make sure they avoid probate, and they want to make sure that they minimize, if not eliminate, as much of the income taxes as possible. They certainly don't want inefficiency in the income taxes. So we have 2 full-time attorneys who do nothing but asset protection and estate planning for us, and so forth and so on. So anything in the investment field, anything, we have investors who basically say, "Hey, Larry, I'm looking at, investing, 150,000, 250,000 into this investment. Can you check it out?" So I say, "Sure." So we do what we call investment review opinion, IRO letters, it's a deep dive into it. And then we give our clients an IRO, which evaluates from a due diligence standpoint, everything about this particular investment that we think they would want to know, and all the pros and cons they would want to be thinking about.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Man, obviously, we're going to have to do additional segments here. There's just too much, Larry.
I understand.
We need to do that. Do you have any final thoughts on what we've talked about, or what you want to convey to any of our viewers?
No, it's just wonderful to talk to you. Remember, I sort of view myself primarily as an educator, but obviously we do a lot. We have clients across the country. Zoom is our friend because we do. There used to be a time when people came to me in my office. Now even the people who live 20 minutes away come to call me through Zoom. So, but I have all across the country. I don't know if it's all 50 states, but it's probably just about. And they're people who are probably your clients. They're people who are in business, who are involved in investment, who are just doing things to make money or to create their aspirations. And we handle all of that for them. If they want to have, just a greater understanding of who we are and what we do, the website, it's www.pinolowgroup.com.
That's awesome.
As you can tell, by the way, I dictate a lot. So I even tell you where the dot lies.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time. I'm going to have to check out your book. It's funny, when I got into this business with Jeff 30 some odd years ago, I expected it to be a 2, 3, 4 year venture to find my niche, find what I wanted to do. And, after about 20 years in the industry, I realized that the independent brokerage was my niche. It's what I wanted to do. Even though I've done some other side ventures. I definitely want to look at or read your book because, Jeff speaks highly of it. And I think a lot of people can benefit from that. Definitely.
Well, fantastic. That's great. Now, by the way, it's out of print. So you can probably find what you'll probably find on some of the different sort of like resellers. You'll probably find somebody's book that I have actually inscribed on the inside cover, and they probably sold it for 40 cents or something.
Gotcha.
But in any event, it's delighted. Glad to always participate. Anytime you want to drill down if you get questions from this and you want to drill down on specific legal topics, that I'm a Zoom call away.
We really appreciate that, and thank you. And Jeff, anything else?
Yeah, no, just hang on for a little bit. If anybody has any questions, add them in the comment section. We'll get them to Larry, and we'll have his answers. But yeah, this has been terrific. I hope we can do segment 2, segment 3, because there's plenty of material here. You've got such an incredible background. I love the way it meshes with the legal aspects of what you're doing now. Being an entrepreneur at your level, you don't find that very often, and then you don't find the combination of business law as well. So hats off on finding your niche very early, Larry.
That's all I did is I just pursued what I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah,
Excellent.
that's a big part of it.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and until next time.
Thank you, Larry.
Larry.
Once again, we are Crossroads Consulting. I'm Jeff. He's Billy. We're available to talk to you about any issues that come up with regards to your business. Our business model is to help you find solutions. There's no cost, there's no obligation to talk to us. You've seen some of the interviews that we've done. We have a lot of resources that we can bring to the table. We welcome you the opportunity to talk to you about your business and some of the challenges that you're facing now. We'll do our best to find the solutions. Again, there's no cost, no obligation.